You are now watching the official YouTube channel for the largest basketball manager game in the world. Join at BuzzerBeater.com if you think you can beat the buzzer.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Bubbles BuzzerBeater, the official BuzzerBeater YouTube channel. We are back today with a very special episode during the BuzzerBeater offseason where I joined a fellow BuzzerBeater manager for a 56-minute podcast episode just talking about BuzzerBeater, the game's appeal, the time investment of the game, the ins and outs of, how it works, current season updates, expectations, different ways to enjoy BuzzerBeater, and tons of other stuff. But I broke this down with Dan Markowski, who's been a BuzzerBeater manager all the way since back to season 3. So he's like a BuzzerBeater OG. But if you wanted to support Dan and his podcast, you can find it in a couple different ways. Primarily, the podcast talks about fantasy and horror books, movies, games, some other things, but lots of different topics there. And you can find it on YouTube at a Happy Moment Podcast or on Twitter at a Happy Moment Pod, and then at the standard sites or apps where you can get podcasts. So I use Spotify, also Apple Music, Good Pods. I'm sure it's on there as well. But I hope you enjoyed the following 56 minutes of BuzzerBeater talk, and I think it's a great way to pitch it to someone who loves manager games or loves basketball or loves both and is interested in potentially starting BuzzerBeater. So without further ado, here's the episode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Happy Moment. My name is Dan, and today I'd like to talk about the world's largest basketball simulation management game, BuzzerBeater. And to do so, I have Tyler with me today. Tyler has his own YouTube channel, and it's called Bubbles BuzzerBeater. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah. I say it's always funny when I'm talking with people that don't know who I am or my username on the actual website. It's my team name on the management game, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, is Explosive Bubble Wrap or Bubbles Exploded. So the YouTube channel's Bubbles BuzzerBeater. So just my name and the game. And people are like, oh, Bubbles, that's interesting. And then they see a 240-pound dude with a beard and they're like, Bubbles? I'm like, yeah, this is how it went. But yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk about the game with you.
Awesome. Tyler, how long have you been playing BuzzerBeater for?
Yeah, I can never remember the exact season that I started because I've had a couple of different accounts with the game. I want to say it was sometime around 2011, and it's very much a game that I started, and it's a slow paced game where it's you don't have to be super involved with it. So it's nice in the aspect of people who are interested in a game that's not like NBA 2K, for example, is a game where if you have a full-time job and you're trying to be competitive in NBA 2K, it's impossible. It's very much a game that's geared towards long-term planning that's more slow-paced. So because I've been on the game for now over a decade across a couple of different accounts, it's hard for me to say exact, but I'd say sometime around 2011 or season 17 or so on the BuzzerBeater game.
Okay. And I think that's one of the strengths of BuzzerBeater is that it doesn't require a huge time investment, and you can kind of make it as casual or hardcore as you want. I probably do maybe 30 minutes a week for seasons where I'm not in a really competitive league. But if you want, you can also spend a whole lot more time strategizing. And there's a lot of different tactics you can use during games too for offense and defense. So there's a lot of planning. You can scout your opponents if you really want to get that in depth into it. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I like about BuzzerBeater, and I think why I've been able to stick around as long as I have, because it doesn't require that huge time investment, like you said, like 2K does.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I love about it is it's a game that's not pay to win. So no, there's a lot of games for, Xbox, PlayStation, online PC games, tons of just app games as well on your phone, but a ton of games are just pay to win nowadays, which is probably great for the people that have the game set up. But the fact that BuzzerBeater is not pay to win and it's very much a level playing field for everyone is something that I really like. And then, as you mentioned, the rate of which you want to put into the game is very much up to you. So it's something where you can always preset lineups for the entire week. I know people that very much just get on BuzzerBeater once or twice a week for like 15, 20 minutes up to like half hour and set up their stuff for the week and go, we'll check it a couple times in the week, make sure everything's looking good. But for the most part, you set stuff up and let it ride. And then there's people like myself who are a little bit more psychotic about the game. And I'm probably on it for, you said half hour like a week. I'm probably on it like half hour or plus a day. And the pros of that is you and I are on the same playing field, regardless of me putting more time in. And you could play my team tomorrow and beat my team because there's no like benefit to me being on the game more, but there's a lot of aspects of the game that I like to be on the same.
Absolutely. And that's a very important point is that this game is 100% free. There is an optional supporter that you can sign up for, but that does not, like you said, that does not give you any advantages in the game. It'll do stuff like give you access to like additional stats for your players, it'll help you set up scrimmages, that sort of thing. You can also have a second team if you so choose, a Utopia team, but no competitive advantage there. And Tyler, you have your YouTube channel. There's a lot of useful information there for both new and old players alike. Do you have a lot of people approach you for advice on the game?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because with a YouTube channel, you're essentially putting yourself out there as like somewhat of a spokesperson or like somewhat of an expert on the game. And I would say that while you could consider me as like a spokesperson for the game, even though I can't even speak, as you can hear, as a spokesperson for the game, I would say that I'm no more of an expert than a lot of the people. There's so many other managers that have been playing the game for years and years and decades. And the other cool thing about BuzzerBeater is there's a lot of unknown about the game where you can like theorize or talk about like, oh, I think this is how it works. I think this is how the game engine works. I think this is the ideal player build, but I'm not sure. So benefit of that is regardless of how much time you're putting into it, there's a lot of aspects of BuzzerBeater that are unknown. So I'd say with the YouTube channel, a lot of people reach out and like short random questions I love answering. The more like in depth, like, hey, can you help me plan out my entire season sort of stuff? I know that there are some forums on the BuzzerBeater website that you can reach out to where there are like mentors who are like, oh, I want to like help people out. I want to like mentor people. I don't always have like the time to do that, but I do love that people reach out and kind of view me as it's always nice to be like, oh, someone's asking me questions. I feel like I can be helpful. That's just a good feeling like for out life in general. So even for something as small as like a buzzer beater basketball manager game, I think it's cool that people reach out.
Is there anything that stands out to you as like the number one like most requested topic for advice?
Yeah, so buzzer beater at a whole is a game about money. So it's like as much of a management economics game as it is about like basketball. So like I even know a lot of managers who are on buzzer beater and love the game and they're like, I don't watch the NBA. I don't like basketball in general. I do it for the manager aspect, which I think is interesting because like I love basketball, huge Denver Nuggets fan, but I also love the management aspect. So like for me, it's both. But the cool thing with buzzer beater is the people that love basketball but aren't gung ho about like the management economic side are going to like Buzzer Beater, as well as the people on the other side. Where it's like I just view it as like a math economics game. It's interesting to me the way that the game works. It's interesting to me how I can like plan out the future of this quote unquote franchise. So I'd say the request that I get for the most part is questions about the economic side of the game, which is actually the side that I'm less interested in. So it is funny that people ask me about the stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm not as much of an expert or I'm not as interested in that as some other managers. But I'd say a lot of questions about like economics. So like a recent one was I've had like 3 or 4 YouTube comments asking me, have you thought about making a video on, you know, when to replace your staff members? Because on BuzzerBeater, you can hire staff members, you can hire a trainer or a doctor or a PR manager. So like higher levels of those will help out with different things for your team. And their salaries increase every week. So there's a certain point where you like look at replacing them, bringing in another staff member. And it's some sort of like long math equation that I'm certainly not smart enough to like divulge to other people, but there's some sort of equation that I'm sure is ideal for when you replace a staff member and is like the most economically advanced or smart way to do so. And I just don't have an answer for them. So that's where it's like, I'm interested in like reaching out to some of those math degree people on BuzzerBeater and ask them if they can help me put that video together. But yeah, that's one that I've gotten recently is when to replace a staff member. But I think a lot of questions about just like the economics of BuzzerBeater as a whole. And then the other main one is the game engine for BuzzerBeater was recently tweaked slightly, where tactics and skills work a little bit differently than they might have like 2-3 seasons ago. So a lot of questions about how is the new game engine working, which skills or tactics are more valuable or less valuable now. I'd say those are the two main ones I've seen.
Okay. I'm with you though on the economic side of things. That's not really my strong suit, and it's something I don't pay a whole lot of attention to on Buzzer Beater. Let's take a look at what someone brand new to the game is going to experience when they first sign up. Depending on when they join, they might get stuck in a league full of teams a lot better than they are. They could get stuck in a higher league, but try not to get too discouraged because you'll likely get demoted down to a division where you have teams of your own equal footing. So it's been a long time since I've been a new player. I know your team has been started up more recently. What's the new player experience like right now as far as what they have access to? Because I know there's some kind of a training scenario they go through.
Yeah, so I know that there's an updated tutorial for the game, which I think has been really helpful for people starting out because one of the older issues of Berserk Beater was since it's a slow paced game where it's very much like you slowly find out things about the game and about your team as you go along. It's hard to capture that initial appeal of like someone that's getting on the site or getting on the game. So I'd say the tutorial that they've created is really helpful to just help navigate the site, which is also very vast. There's a lot of different things you can do on the website, as well as the Buzzer Beater app, which you can download on your phone. There's a lot of things you can do for it. So the tutorial that has been updated, I think is really helpful in just like kind of scoping out how the game works, what you should be paying attention to. And then I do know that the Buzzer Beater developers have indicated to me that there's an interest in setting up sort of like an immediate game for newer managers who are getting onto the site. I don't know if this is going to be something that's active like this season, in the next couple of seasons, what this looks like. But there is an intrigue of letting managers just start right away, see their team, get attached to those players that are on their team. And I think that's something that would be useful as well. Because when I joined and likely when you joined, it's like, okay, I've joined this site. I'm like looking at my team. I was like, okay, well, when do I play? You check and it's like, okay, I play on Tuesday, but it's Sunday. So I have to wait like 48 hours before I get to see my team play. Slow paced game, benefit of that's really awesome for people that don't need to do a lot during those 2 days. For someone that wants to get right into it though, that might be a drawback of like, well, I want to see my team play right now. Other benefit that just came out, gosh, like yesterday, today, I think that was today, was there's a new feature which is called pickup games that you can actually schedule to play. Like if you want to schedule with a friend or a random person or even a bot team, you can schedule the game to play in 10 minutes and 15
Hmm.
minutes. So you can schedule one right away now, which I think will be really useful for newer managers who are getting on the game so they can see their team in action right away if they want to.
Okay, that's awesome. That's a cool feature. And Tyler, let me know if you agree with this. I think when someone is just starting out, there might be a temptation to win right away and spend all your money to go and try and buy like the best players you can find. But the reality is, long term, that's not very economically feasible. I think a more sound strategy is to focus on building up your arena, get a bigger arena so you can bring in more money. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's always like the instant gratification thing of like, oh, I want it now sort of thing. And with BuzzerBeater, since it's a slower paced game, you're essentially starting down in like Division 3, Division 4, depending on which country you're in. It can take a long time before you're able to compete at a higher level. I know some people want to, as you said, like buy like players right away, try to push for promotion. There's like a running joke of people where it's like you look at a new team and you see a bunch of like 37-year-old players on their roster who are like declining in skills and not going to be very useful for very long. And it's like, oh, those are the old players that you don't necessarily want. The way that I usually describe it that I think's helpful for managers, specifically outside of the United States, but Buzzer Beater's model is kind of built in a way of like international soccer. So like a lot of like leagues, if you just look at like the Premier League, there's the Premier League and then there's a championship league and then like lower leagues in England as well as like other Spain, Germany, wherever. But there's different leagues where it's like if there's a brand new franchise that's being created, they're not going to be playing in the Premier League. They're not going to be playing like Liverpool or like Manchester City right away. You're going to be in like a League Three or a League Four where it's like, okay, well, how do we get to this point? And oftentimes it's not bringing in a player that's like super good right now. It's training young players. So a big aspect of BuzzerBeater I really like and I think is super interesting is that you can train and develop players. And this is often something that we recommend to newer managers is find a couple players that you want to train, expand your arena because arena expansion is something that you don't think about a lot as like something that's very fun to do. But your arena is going to be how you make a lot of money, both in real life as well as in Buzzer Beater. So looking at that and saying, let's find a couple young trainees, let's expand the arena, let's take it slow. That's really the best process for a startup team in Buzzer Beater.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely agree with that. And so a buzzer beater season is about roughly about 3 months. And we have two regular season games every week. And then also every country has their own national tournament, the cup. Those are played once a week where you compete against all the other teams in your country, which is very cool. And then in more recent times, they've also added the Buzzer Beaters Best tournament, which is you get placed into a tier of similar ranked teams from all over the world and compete against them. So they are making strides and adding more games to keep people busy that want the extra games. And you can also earn a little bit of extra cash in these as well. So it's those are both very fun additions, I think, to the game.
Yeah, definitely. I know for me, I've always been a person where it's like, I like the amount of games per week. What I especially like of what they've added with the pickup games is that it's an option to play more games and not something you have to do. So if like, for instance, Dan said, I'm only putting like half hour into each week. I kind of know when the games are. If you're like, I don't want to have to play like 6, 7 games a week, you don't have to, but it's a nice option now. And then, yeah, the Buzzer Beater Madness, Buzzer Beater Best tournaments is a really cool thing too, because those are essentially games where it's like you can run whatever tactics, you can test out how good your team is in something that's not affecting your league games or not affecting your cup. So I really like that aspect that they've added. But yeah, a lot of different games, a lot of different days of the week that there's games or options for games now. And then another thing that I think is interesting, you had mentioned the cups for each nation, how each nation will have each cup for their specific nation. There's also a national team or U21 national team scene that I'm very involved with that I think is really cool, where you actually get to play against other international teams. So, for example, the USA U21 national team is just all players 21 or younger, which usually ends up being mostly just 21-year-olds, maybe a 20-year-old here and there. But that's a cool aspect of the game where you pull these players from every manager in Buzzer Beater. If they have a USA 21-year-old that's good enough to make the team, you essentially pull those players from all the teams and compete with other nations in international competition. And that's a very nice thing to do as well, because certain managers will value different things or have fun in different ways. Where I know for a long time, I had more fun like coaching and working with the U21 national team than I did even running my own team. Like I cared way more about the like go USA sort of thing than I did about like my specific team in Division 3. But there's a lot of different ways to be invested and stay involved on Buzzer Beater through these different events and tournaments that they offer.
Yeah, and another cool thing about the under 21 national team is so if you're new to the game, it's probably going to be a while before your team is very good and you're able to compete at a higher level. But any team can still, you know, look for a 18 or 19-year-old player, train them, and try and get them a spot on the U21 team. So that's very cool. But that's always something in the back of my mind whenever a draft is coming up. Ooh, I wonder if I can get a player for the U21 team.
Yeah.
And that's another thing we haven't touched on yet is the draft. So every season there is a draft. There's a pool of 48 players, and after the All-Star break, You can spend scouting points to find out about these players, and sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. The players available in the pool are kind of randomized, I think. But again, that's another fun part of the game that I enjoy.
Yeah, I'll say some of them are good, some of them are bad. Such is life. It feels like a lot of times that's how it goes in the real world too, where it's like if you cheer for an NBA team and you're like, man, my team's been bad for so long. Why do we never do well in the draft? It's like, yeah, same exact thing for Buzzer Beater. Where it's like sometimes you'll draft someone that's really good, really, you know, franchise changing for your Buzzer Beater team. And then other times it's like, okay, this player is not exactly what I wanted, but you are able to find players on what we call a transfer list on BuzzerBeater, where I know a lot of like professional leagues in real life, they don't necessarily have like a transfer list. It's more like trade. So once again, going back to the NBA, there's like free agents, but typically those aren't very good players. It's like you acquire good players via trade or via the draft. On BuzzerBeater, there's a transfer list where with the money that you're saving, so once again, it's a game about money. If you're making, say you're making $100,000 per week with your BuzzerBeater team, and then you saved up like $700,000 and you want to improve your team, that's where you can go to the transfer list, and every player that's on the transfer list are going to be various skill levels, various salaries, various ages, but all players that other managers have trained and then decided, actually, I want to move on from this player or I want to sell them for a profit sort of thing. And the transfer list is something that's unique about BuzzerBeater, where I think it's a quick but easy way to build your team later on, which is why you don't have to worry about doing it like right away, because you can develop players. And then once you're 18, 19 year olds are like 21, 22, and they're a lot better, you can pick up players from the transfer list when you're like more ready to compete. And a lot of times those players can help you with like promotion to higher leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyler, let's talk a little bit about the training in Buzzer Beater. So every player has their own set of skills, such as rebounding, passing, outside shooting. And if you play a player a certain amount of minutes a game, or per week rather, in a certain position, then they get a little boost in their training. There's been some debate recently that about the training speed. I know a lot of people wish it was a little bit faster. Personally, I feel like it's just about right. I mean, I could be a little bit faster. How do you feel, Tyler?
Yeah, no, I like the changes that they made a couple years ago, because I know that they've added additional staff members or like a youth trainer. So like a youth trainer for BuzzerBeater is something that used to not exist. And now there's a youth trainer staff option where you can add a staff member that focuses on training like 18, 19-year-old players and making them a little bit faster. And then there's also other options called like a training court where you can improve your players' free throw shooting. There's a gym option where you can improve players' just skills in general through training. So I think there's a lot of options for faster training. And I've been a big advocate for keeping training as it's currently constructed. I know some people want faster training. What's interesting, or what my argument is when talking about the training speeds in BuzzerBeater, is that we are to the point in BuzzerBeater where you can train like an MVP or Hall of Fame level player, which is like one of the highest potentials you can get for players. You can cap that player, or essentially say like, okay, this player has reached their entire potential. I can't train them and improve them anymore. You can cap that player and get to that point by the time they're like age 25. And it's like, okay, well, that seems like it's pretty fast. Like if we're speeding it up, how quickly are we capping these players? Are you saying you want to cap players at age 22 or 23? Because that seems kind of like a sped up process. So I'd say my argument's always been that I think the balance right now is perfect, where you can cap players earlier than you used to, but you're not capping players when they're like 20, 21 years old, because that wouldn't make sense for the game structure, as Buzzer Beater is a slow paced game, or it doesn't make sense as like a realism aspect where it's like, if you look at a professional league or professional players in general for any sport, generally those players are going to be better at age 27 than they are at age 22. Like players just get better in that time. So if you're able to cap a player that much earlier, I just think it's not true to the realism aspect of Buzzer Beater. or the nature of the game that a lot of the older managers like, where it is a slower paced game that takes time to put in, where it's like it takes, um, as you mentioned, like 3 months a season for buzzer beater. So if you are training an 18-year-old to 26, it's like it's so gratifying when you have that player when they're capped at age 26 because you've put like a couple of years into playing or training this player. It's been like a full process. If you're capping that player and it's like, okay, I capped him in 6 months and I'm going to move on. I just like it takes a little bit of the magic away from me. So I really like the way that the training set up right now. I think it's a good balance between training players quicker, but not capping them too early.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about the tactics themselves. Uh, so if you're new to the game, you're building your team, you can shape it however you want. If you want to have a team that specializes in inside scoring, you can do that. Outside scoring, definitely you can do that. Do you have any go-to tactics that are your favorites?
Yeah, it's fun because with the modern game engine that they just, implemented in season 60, my opinions on the tactics have changed slightly, but for the most part, I always have a core of like look inside motion, which is like a movement outside offense shooting team. And then I like a patient or like an inside isolation offense. So the the tactics that I choose is a lot of the times like how do I have two or three different tactic options that work well together? We'll probably touch on this, but there's a thing called game day prep where essentially teams predict that you're going to play inside. So let's say my team is strictly an inside oriented team. We play look inside, we play low post, we just, slam the ball inside and say we have two Shaquille O'Neals down there. Let's play ball. If that's my team and someone else can predict that I'm going to play inside, they can actually guess that when they're playing against my team. And if they guess correctly, then their team's defense gets a boost. So essentially their team gets better for predicting that I'm going to play inside. So my big philosophy about tactics and how I run them in Buzzer Beater is I like staying unpredictable because if teams can't predict how I'm going to play outside, inside, or balanced offenses, then it's very hard to use game day prep or predict where I'm going to play. And then it's very hard to get that advantage of like a defensive boost from guessing my tactics. So I'd say look inside is always a standard for most teams in Buzzer Beater. That's like the most prominent offense that's always worked pretty well in Buzzer Beater. But then I'm a big advocate for the motion offense as well as like a patient or inside isolation offense. I really like for season 62.
Yeah, I know for quite a while there, look inside was kind of the king of tactics. I think it's since then it's been toned down a little bit, and other tactics are viable as well. When I look at results of like the national team games, I still do see a lot of look inside though. Have you mentioned you've been a coach of the national team, right? Or is it the U-21?
Yeah, just the U-21 national teams, but they function a lot the same way. And then I did assist a lot of the national teams for USA for like game plan and stuff.
Okay. And you mentioned the game day prep, which I you're guessing you can guess both the specific tactic and also the pace. Each each offensive tactic has its own pace, slow, fast, balanced. And if you guess wrong, the further away you are on your guess, then you're going to be penalized for that. Like if you guess a slow tactic, they play fast, then you're going to get burned for that. But yeah, that just goes into the scouting portion of the game. If you want to scout your opponent, you can definitely do that because there's a lot of teams that they find that one tactic, they stick with it no matter what. So
Yep. Yeah, I'll say it is funny when I'm like scouting and you see some teams as you get into higher leagues are very much like me, where it's like, oh, they're diversifying their offense. It's like four or five different things that they run. And then there's always a team or two in every league, whether they're in division two, three, four, whatever division, where it's like, this is my tactic and I'm sticking with it. And it's like, okay, more power to you. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. And as you mentioned, look inside used to be the tactic that everyone essentially ran because that's what made the most sense for the game engine and what worked for a long time. And that's a big reason that that game day prep was created was because if you're running inside, but a team's guessing it, so look inside's a inside fast offense. So if a team's saying, I know they're going to play look inside and they guess inside fast, it really helps balance that playing field that more times than not is beginning to deter teams from running look inside all the time because they don't want to have that game day prep guesses give their opponent a defensive boost by them running the same thing every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then a team you make it you join Buzzer Beater, you make it through your very first season, and then towards the end of the season, depending on your place in the standings, you might get put into a playoff series against a team from the other conference. Um, if you're in the top four, you have a chance at promoting. If you're underneath that, then there's a chance that you may get demoted, depending on how you finish. But for those that are in a lower league, demotion doesn't really do anything. You're pretty much just gonna stick where you are. So I kind of wish there was a way for teams that are just starting out, if they could just like somehow be immediately placed into one of those lower division teams. Just because I think if they get placed in a higher league, it might be kind of discouraging to get beat by like 50, 60 points every game, you know?
Yeah, and I think they do that for the most part. I know in the USA at least, almost all of the time teams are placed into Division 4. Where I do notice more of an issue is for like different nations that might have a smaller user base. So like for the United States, there's like well over 1,000 users. I think closer to like 1,500 users, if not more, on the game. If you play for a country, let's say Argentina, if you're someone from Argentina that wants to play Buzzer Beater and the pool of managers for your nation is slightly smaller, or even if we go, let's not say Argentina. Let's say South Africa. So South Africa is a team that actually helped their U21 team out as well, and ran them. But they're a team, or they're a nation where there's like less than 20 active managers for South Africa on Buzzer Beater. So if you're a manager playing in South Africa, you're going to naturally get added into like a tougher league. So another thing that they have done, I'd say in the last, once this was like 3 or 4 years ago, for those like micronations or countries where there's very, very few managers in them, they've kind of clumped them together. So there's like a Nations of Africa league where there's they're adding managers to the pool so that there's less of those managers getting put into a top league or top two league. Since there's more managers to like trickle that down so that they can play in like a Division 3 or Division 4 first. So I think that alleviates some of the concern for newer managers. Specifically in the United States, I'd say more times than not, you're starting out in Division 4, which is the bottom league currently. But in rare situations, there are those managers where it's like, why am I in Division 2? And it's like, well, because you play in Sweden and there's not that many managers. So it's just kind of a bad luck sort of thing where the dynamics are a little bit different. So definitely a concern. And there's not like a right or wrong way to like advise those managers because there's, you know, it's very different playing in Division 4 USA than it is playing in Division 2 Sweden. Just the dynamics of the league and how good teams are in each of the leagues are very, very different. So it's one of the weird, like more nuanced thing about Buzzer Beater. But I'd say for USA specifically, I think it's a non-issue because a lot of those are in Division to start.
Okay. And as a new player, I think it helps too if you realize that wins and losses don't really matter for your team right away. Like we talked about earlier, it's just you want to focus on your economy. And it's kind of building a stable base for your team to support better players in the future. So I think as long as you realize that, then it shouldn't be a big deal for most people.
Yeah, it's like an expansion team. Like most in real life, most expansion teams are like one of the worst teams in the league when they get expanded. So like for example, I know the Major League Baseball is looking at potentially bringing a team to Salt Lake City where I live, and I'm like, oh, it'll be interesting to watch. But I'm sure if they actually did that, the team would be terrible for a season or two, and that's totally fine and it's expected. So it's like as long as you're coming in with the anticipation of like I'm not going to be a rock star right away, then usually you're okay, and it's easier to like internalize. Okay, I want to do building blocks to get to my finish line rather than saying, all right, I want to dead sprint this marathon because you're going to get tired in the first mile. It's like, I know that this is the destination. I know that it's a long-term game. It's just kind of planning that and internalizing, like, I'm not going to have it right away, I think is something that's crucial for success in Buzzer Beater.
Yeah. And so currently, we're just getting underway with a brand new season here. We played one game so far. Tell us a little bit about your main team. What do you have high expectations for this season? What division are you in? How are things going?
Yeah, so for my USA team, because I'm one of the managers that I pay for a Utopia team, just so I have a second team to like test things out, have a little bit of fun. It's really useful for the YouTube channel, so I can like show off the Utopia team without like essentially I can inform people how the buzzer beater game works and show off a roster without having to like disclose my USA team, which I value a little bit more. But my USA team is in Division 2 right now, which is the highest division I've ever been in. So I've never been to the Division 1 or the MBBA for the USA. I'd say Division 2 is about as challenging as I expected. It's very, very hard to like get to be one of the best teams in Division 2 to get to that top league. So I know the first couple of seasons I've been like a fringe playoff team. Think I was a third seed my first season, and then I missed the playoffs by one seed last year. So this year I'm just kind of treading water, trying to do the same exact thing. I want to stay in like a fringe playoff spot. I just essentially want to make sure I don't demote down to the Division 3. Going okay so far. I did lose the first game of the season, which was a little bit of a heartbreaker, but I do have a lot of money in my account. So I know beginning of the season, you probably noticed this as well, but like players go for crazy expensive because everyone's trying to like revamp their teams right away. So I have over 2 million in the bank right now, and I'm just like holding on to, protecting, trying to make sure I'm not like exploding or like throwing my money at someone that's not worth it. So not great right now, but I figure in the next couple of weeks, my team and my roster will look a little bit better where I can stay up in Division 2. And then my plan for, long-term thinking is pushing for promotion in the next couple of seasons, but not this season specifically. How about you? How's your team looking?
I'm I'm kind of in the same boat you are, but I'm in Division 3 right now, and I'm looking
Mhm.
at probably at least a few more seasons before I'm ready to make a push for that promotion. Like you, I've never made it to the NBBA. I've only made it to Division 2 one time, and that was just recently. And once I got demoted, it was time to kind of blow up the team and start fresh. So I'm in a bit of a rebuilding process right now. And I've never been a very good coach, but because I'm a glutton for punishment, apparently I've made things even harder on myself. So about 15, 20 seasons ago, I think the United States U21 wasn't doing so well, and there was kind of a little bit of a push to, kind of rally the troops sort of thing and keep people more invested in the U21. And there was a little bit of a push to get people to, have more national players on their team or more American players on your team and try and train them for the U21. So I started doing that. And then just 3 seasons ago, I decided, why not take things a step further? I'm going all homegrown. So homegrown is you don't have any players on your team that you didn't draft. So that's a bit of a challenge. 'Cause I know a couple seasons ago, man, the draft was terrible. There was nothing. It was just really bad. This most recent one, I did get a decent 19-year-old player with superstar potential, 6'10". He's someone I can definitely build into a starting position. But right now, I've got probably two guys that could compete on a Division 2 roster. So I've definitely got some work to do. It's an interesting thing just going all homegrown because,
Yeah.
the transfer list is useless to me now. I'm not going to go on there to buy anybody, unless it was
Yep.
some player that I drafted a long time ago and then sold. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do with it.
Yeah. And, that's just proof to concept that you can enjoy this game for so many different reasons. It's not a totally like result based game where it's like, if you're not in the top league, if you're not winning, if you're not promoting, then it's not fun. Like, that's just not how the game works. There's so many different managers that have fun doing different things. So, like training for U21, or as you said, like fully homegrown, I'd say it's probably maybe like 2 to 3% of managers that are like you who are going like fully homegrown. And it's definitely harder to compete because you can make use of that transfer list. But I'd say the end result of you, like when you do eventually promote to Division 2, or eventually promote to the MBBA, it's going to be that much more rewarding because like, it's like, these are all of your guys. It's like, you've had this same group of players. These are your guys. You've had them for, years, literally, when you're promoting. Whereas me, I'm a cheater. I go to the transfer list and go, oh, that guy looks pretty good. I'm going to add him to my roster. And like, that's fun for me as well. But there's just a lot of different ways to have fun with the game where you don't necessarily have to be in the top league. I know one of my BuzzerBeater friends, his name's GM Nick, and I'm sure he won't mind me telling this, but he was like talking with I think it was his girlfriend or someone else, but he was mentioning, he's like, oh yeah, I'm finally made it to the top league in this online game that I've played for 13 years. He goes, go me. Where it's like the stakes seem so low, but it's such an interesting, fun game that, those accomplishments mean something when you've built towards it for like years and years for like a long-term planning game.
Yeah, and I think as long as you don't get like, too hyper focused on it and like burn yourself out, you're gonna have a lot of fun with the game. I know I have, and I've been here since season 2, which feels like forever ago, and it kind of
You're a
was.
true, you're a true original.
Yeah, I think that was like 2008. So, and just a fun fact: when I started Buzzer Beater, I won my very first game on a buzzer beater. So I
There you
always thought that
go.
was kind of cool.
No, was there an instant in your mind you're like, is this scripted? Like they make this happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, am I gonna push a beater? That's interesting. But no, that's really cool. I didn't know that.
And even though it was 2008, I still remember the guy's name too, Clarence Gross. I think he was my starting shooting guard. So, and speaking of that, that kind of reminds me of another little neat feature that Buzzer Beater has. I think this is only for supporters though, is you have the ability to put players into your own personal Hall of Fame for your team,
Right.
which is very cool. I think I'm pretty stingy with my Hall of Fame. I don't know about you. I've been playing all that time and I have maybe 6 or 7 guys in there. How about
Yeah.
you? Is that something you utilize?
Yes, I have two in there for my USA team. So one of the players is a guy that started out on my initial team. So when I first created this new account, he was one of my star players that I got for completing this tutorial. So like if you start Buzzer Beater, complete the tutorial, you're rewarded with like 3 players that are slightly better than your initial roster. And one of them that made it to my Hall of Fame is one of those 3 tutorial players that got placed on my team. And he is still on my roster. So he's been essentially on my team the entire time. And then my other one is the player that I've trained up since he was 18, has never played a game with anyone else. And he's the one that helped me get to Division 2 for the first time. So I'd say those are the only 2 on my USA Hall of Fame. And then for my Utopia team, I think I have just one guy in there right now who was on the U21 South Africa team that I coach. So yeah, I'm like you, pretty stingy. You can add in a lot more players if you're like a participation trophy sort of girl or guy, you can add a lot more people in there. But I'd say I only have 3 across my 2 teams right now.
Let's talk a little bit about the future of Buzzer Beater. I recently watched an episode on your YouTube channel where you're talking about improvements that they can make to the game, like small improvements, such as like, well, for instance, currently in Buzzer Beater, players don't go away. You can have, if you want to, you can have like a 80-year-old player on your team, for example. And like I know I have a guy that's 67. I, they're not really good for anything other than nostalgia, but I mean, if you ever need someone to shoot free throws, they're good for that at least. But so and your idea was to you like to kind of do away with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a lot of people will notice, and you'll probably notice as you like watch my videos and then see my like messages and posts on the Buster Beater website, like in the forums. I'm a big advocate, or I'm a big believer in realism with Buzzer Beater, where it's like, obviously it's a game. Obviously, like this isn't real money. These aren't real players. It's a fake world. Buzzer Beater is a fake world. None of it really matters. With that being said, the fun part for me is that it's a basketball manager game, and I want it to reflect like what real life basketball is like. So that's a big reason why I think the tactic changes have helped a lot. It's a big reason why I enjoy like cheering for the players and like looking at the different matchups so much because I view them as like, okay, if this was a real team, this is how it would function. In real life, you don't have 75-year-olds out on the court just to like soak up minutes. It's just not something that you see. So my opinion on it is that it's not a huge issue. It's not something I'm like gonna like go to war on, but it's just something where it's like I think my suggestion was if you auto retire players at age 50, I don't think that's like a bad thing. So players start regressing in their skills at age 30, third buzzer beater. So by age 50, they're already like atrocious in every skill. So it's like some guys will use them as like minute sponges where it's like I'll throw them into a scrimmage. I'll throw my 75-year-old guy named Gary out there to just soak up minutes, which I think is fine. I just think that for a realism aspect, capping it at age 50 and auto retiring players would make more sense. So that was my suggestion among other things in that video. But yeah, it's definitely funny to see the 70, 80-year-olds out there. I just don't think it like adds to some aspect.
And just touch on something else real quick here that you mentioned just now, soaking up minutes. So if you have a really awesome player on your team, um, it's not really feasible to just play him 48 minutes every single game. If you go over 90 minutes played in a week, that player's game shape is likely going to start to fall, and then his performance will drop. So, which I'm glad they do, because like you said, I also like the realism aspect of it. And the reality is the best players in the NBA don't play for 48 minutes every single game, if ever. So that's kind of important, I think.
Yeah, no, I really like that aspect too because I'd say I think I have a whole video talking about like managing minutes. But essentially, my sweet spot for minutes per week for players is always like 60 to 70 minutes is perfect. Slightly above that or slightly below that's also okay. But yeah, if you're playing a guy like 110 minutes per week, in real life he's going to get tired, and buzzer beater he's also going to get tired. Where game shape's a big proponent as to how well they play because you'll have like your player's skills and then like the force multiplier down at the bottom is what is their game shape? And it goes from 1 to 9, from atrocious all the way up to proficient. And depending on where they're at in there, they're going to play better or worse depending on how many minutes they played and how their game shape is. So yeah, I agree. I think game shape's probably one of the things that a lot of people don't think about as much, but pay attention to all the time is how many minutes are my players playing? Is that too much or is that too little?
Yeah, absolutely. What are some other minor changes that you'd like to see take place?
Yeah, there's a lot. It's a lot of it's from a convenience aspect rather than like a requirement. So like the video that I created recently was just like a buzzer beater minor suggestion sort of video. And I'd say in that, aside from like the retire players at age 50, draft history for a specific team, I think is something that I think would be really cool. So like, especially for you, if you're like a fully homegrown team where a manager suggests essentially their entire roster's draft picks, I think it would be cool to have like a drop down menu of like draft history of like, oh, this is what I did in season 60, 61, 62. And you just kind of see them laid out down there for like when you drafted them, if they're still on your team, just a draft history board for specific teams, I think would be really cool. And then some of the other things would be able to favorite or save BB mails. So on Buzzer Beater, there's BB mails, which essentially just like is the Buzzer Beater version of Gmail. And for BB mails, that's vastly how U21 and national team managers communicate with the managers of their players. So since you can pick up players from essentially any team on the game as long as they're that nation, you can communicate with them via BB mail. However, a lot of them are like not necessarily like USA managers. So like if I'm a USA coach and I'm like, okay, this player's really good, I want him on my team, and I check their manager, say, okay, it's a manager from Spain. Say, okay, cool. Well, I'm a BB mail him because it's like I don't have his contact information. I can't just like text him like, hey, by the way. So we use BB mail to communicate. At a certain point, those BB mails disappear. And if you're a U21 or national team manager, you're sending out like hundreds of these. So like if you're trying to build a pipeline and be like, okay, this is my pool of players. I want to make sure I communicate with them so I can get the best 12 to 18 guys on the roster in 2 or 3 seasons from now. you're sending up hundreds of BB mails, and then it's like, okay, I can't favorite this or save it. So how am I going to keep track of this? And you have to like use a lot of external sources. So I'd say that would be another thing that I'd suggest adding, but just a lot of smaller things. Overall, I really like the game. It's just most things in life. It's like, this is good. I'd like to make it great. Same exact thing for BuzzerBeater. It's like, I really like the game as it is, but there's just small tweaks that can be made every season that make it better.
Yeah, definitely. And I should point this out because I didn't mention it earlier. BuzzerBeater is all text based. It's not a video game. There's no fancy graphics that you're watching. You can watch the games being played out. What you're watching is just a play by play of what's going on. And there's also a court, so you can see, who's shooting, where the shots are coming from. How far away are they standing from the hoop when they're taking a shot. And that's kind of something that I'd like to see an update to, is that I wish that when you're watching a game, you could click on a player's name, like all his shots will be highlighted. I feel like that'd just be a little bit easier to get an idea of the certain player's shot chart, so how you can adjust your tactics accordingly, maybe to get them more inside or outside shots. But that's something I think would be beneficial.
Yeah, I like that too. I think that's also something that's practical to add. Like, I don't think that's, I know
Right.
somebody will mention like, oh, I want it to like display like players running around. I'm like, okay, I think you're hoping for a lot there. But no, I think yours, that would be something that I think would be nice and also something that's probably not too difficult to add in. So I'd agree. I think that would also be a good minor addition to the game.
Yeah. And just within the past year, 2 years, BuzzerBeater has added apps, so you can download that on your phone and play the game mobilely. Is mobilely a word? I don't know. Um,
A mobile word, we'll go with it. I think it is.
okay. So yeah, so you can play it mobilely. It's still kind of a work in process, but they're always updating it, adding new features. Other than keep on upgrading the app, looking at the game long term, what do you see for the future of BuzzerBeater?
Yeah, I think being realistic about it, I imagine right now the user base will stay about what it is right now. So right now we're hovering right around 14,000 users. Sometimes we dip down to like 13,500. Sometimes we go up to like 15,000. But right around 14,000 is about the sweet spot of where it's at for like a global game of 14,000 managers, which is like pretty vast when you think about like these are managers from all over the world, let alone the country. I think that once the app is further refined and developed, and like once they have a final product for it, they're planning on doing outreach to all of the previous managers that had ever signed up on BuzzerBeater and essentially shooting them an email and saying like, hey, just so you know, the game's been revamped. It looks way different. It acts way different than it did, you know, 10 seasons ago or 10 years ago, depending on when they played. And I think that once the app is in its quote unquote final form and they send out those massive emails, I imagine that's going to be like, 50,000, 100,000 emails that they're sending out. That'll be a big mail merge for them. But I think once they do that, that should help with retention as well. Because a big issue that some people who have left the game in the past have had is they're like, well, the game hasn't changed in like 15 seasons, like from season, well, like from season, we'll say season 10 to season 25, the changes of the game were very, very minimal. And there's a lot of frustrations where it's like, I want this to change, or like, why does BuzzerBeater do this? And nothing was changing. BuzzerBeater does have a new developer, BB Justin, who, he doesn't get paid a lot, if at all. I don't really know how much he gets paid, but really awesome human, really awesome guy. And he's been the biggest reason why I think BuzzerBeater can like bounce back in a large way and like get back up to like tons more users, because he's been making changes. He's been improving the game, especially over the last 5 or so seasons. And I think just the product that he's presenting is way better than it was 10 years ago, where, some of the BBs or the developers from years past, they're either no longer active or it's like they have full-time jobs as well. Just like us, it's like we have full-time jobs. We do BuzzerBeater as a hobby. That's what a lot of them do as well, where there's not like a sole-on like full-time worker for BuzzerBeater. So the changes are going to be minor and gradual over time. But I think BB Justin's been a huge part as to why I think it can be so successful in the future moving forward.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about the future of BuzzerBeater, and you mentioned BB Justin, and I just want to give a shout out to BB Justin and everyone else who contributes to keeping this game running. So thank all you guys for that. As you know, I've been doing this for 15 years now. It's a lot of fun. So definitely hats off to those guys and gals. Definitely appreciate it because I know it, like you mentioned, they're doing this as a hobby. So it's really cool that they do this, and I hope they stick with it.
Yeah, no, I'm not too worried about it. I know years ago, I'd say back in like 2020, 2021, there was like rumors like, is this game going to stick it out? And I think there's like not a doubt in anyone's mind that it's going to stick around now with the DV Justin edition. I think it's on a good trajectory, especially with the app. The BuzzerBeater app was something that was like in the back of people's minds for like years. Now that's actually a thing. It's like that's a huge step in towards of like drawing in people because a lot of people, it's like for a web based game, not everyone's going to have access to or want to like get on their computer all the time to like play a game. So having an app where people can access the buzzer beater tools and, essentially never need to go onto the website once it's fully finished, then I think that would also help with retention as well as interesting new managers to the game. So I think it's in a good spot right now.
Yeah, definitely. Tyler, this hour has flown by. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Anything you feel like that we didn't cover that we should have?
I don't think so. I'm sure we probably missed some stuff, but that's the great thing about BuzzerBeater is there's so much to it that you really just have to get on it to like find out what aspects of it you like, what you enjoy. And then my always like 30-second elevator pitch is that if you love basketball, you'll like BuzzerBeater. If you don't like basketball, if you love like economics or management stuff, you're gonna love it. And then if you love both of them, it's probably going to become one of your new favorite games. So I think it's a little bit of something that can appeal to everyone. And I'd really encourage everyone to check it out because it's a great game that Dan and I have both played for over a decade each now. So it's like, it's not, we're not faking it. We're not just brand new to this and pitching it to you. We've both lived it for over a decade and really enjoy it.
Yeah. The game is BuzzerBeater. You can find that at www.buzzerbeater.com. And Tyler, Bubbles BuzzerBeater on YouTube. Are there any other places where people can find you that you talk about BuzzerBeater?
I don't think so. I think just the BuzzerBeater website itself and then the Bubbles BuzzerBeater at YouTube should work just fine. So yeah, find me on there if you join, and I'm sure there's lots of useful new videos for you as well.
Yeah, and also like to mention that on the BuzzerBeater website, there is a forum that you can go to. A lot of friendly folks on there. You can ask for advice. BuzzerBeater is also on Discord. So again, another place where you can go ask for advice. Definitely hope you'll check it out. And Tyler, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a ton, Dan. It was good talking with you.
All right, and thank all you for joining me and Tyler. It was great having you with us today. You can find me on Twitter at Happy Moment Pod, and you can also find me on YouTube as well. So thank you again, everybody, and take care.